Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Dave Dangle. Very excited to talk with my colleagues from Valley View School District on this next installment of the CFA 2.0 instructional webinars. This is Effective Assessment Item Writing Part 1, just an overview of assessment item writing. And again, for those of you that are in the upcoming cohorts, this is a great opportunity to sort of preview some of the work we'll do. And for those of you in the existing cohorts that have already gone through some of the work, it's a great chance for review. So we're going to move right on. Most of you have had the pleasure and opportunity to work with and get a chance to meet. For those of you that haven't, been in education around 18 years. My background has been as a practitioner, as a middle school and high school administrator in a very large district in Indiana for about 13 years. And during that time, before I started doing the consulting work that I'm doing now, I've been with Valley View now for several years. I started off as a classroom teacher like a lot of you and began working with Larry Ainsworth specifically. He came to my district. We were one of the first partner clients at the time of the Leadership and Learning Center. And so I was very fortunate to work with Larry on some of the early pieces when he developed priority standards or power standards, his original book on wrapping, his first common formative assessment piece, and now CFA 2.0. So I've been very fortunate to use his work as a teacher, building administrator, district level support for CFA implementation, and certainly now as a professional developer. So just kind of sharing that I kind of started my journey where a lot of you are right now as a classroom teacher and having Larry guide and help in many ways to take very research-based elements of designing more effective assessments and make them become very practical and useful, regardless of our discipline or subject matter. One of the overarching points I make every time when we talk about whether it's CFA or anything else, and certainly there's a 10-step process we'll dive into, but any assessment really comes down again to these 3 points. We have a purpose, and then we're gathering evidence to make an inference, whatever that is, whether it's we're in the classroom and we're assessing students over their content knowledge, when they walk in the classroom at the start of the day and we're trying to get a buzz for what's the temperature and culture, maybe for behavior and things, but we're constantly gathering evidence to make a quality inference, and we want to make sure we apply that same rationale, which I think a lot of us can agree with, makes a lot of common sense and simplifies things when we're putting any type of pencil and paper in front of students. And as a district like Valley View that's done a lot of the visible learning work, assessment is feedback for us as teachers, as administrators. So it's a great opportunity to go back to that mind frame. And remember, that's why we're assessing students at any time, so we know what to do next. So what I'm kind of hitting today is sort of an overview, and I mentioned that this would be part 1 of 2 because I wanted to just highlight some pieces related to the assessment items themselves, and we'll come back with another webinar later when we talk about scoring guides or we talk about distractor analysis. But we're really creating the post-assessment. So we unwrap, we identify our priority standards, we unwrap them, we determine the big ideas and essential questions. We might jump in right there and develop our success criteria for our students, but then we're creating the end of unit assessment first. What are we going to say at the end of this unit, no matter how long we've scheduled it or planned for it to take, that would provide students the opportunity to give us enough evidence to make an inference, either that they've met the standards, exceeded the standards we're working on, or if they haven't met them, how far away they are. And I think at times, we've all gone through this, myself personally, when we design an assessment, we might be thinking, wow, right now when I think about my students, they're not ready to do that. Well, of course not yet. The teaching hasn't happened. The quality instruction hasn't happened. The differentiation and adjustment. So we're creating that post-assessment, those questions or items. And there's really 2 kinds of items or questions we can create on an assessment that we're talking about. And certainly there's performance-based assessment that we're going to get into sort of at the end of this process and talk about how that ties in. But we're talking in more of a traditional assessment that we'll put in front of students. Selected response or constructed response are really the 2 kinds. And very simply, selected response simply means the students pick or select their choice answer or their answer from a set of choices, whether that's multiple choice, true, false. Maybe we give them an open-ended, where they have to fill in the blank, but the word bank is provided for them. We'll focus for the most part on designing multiple choice items. Not that they're the end-all be-all, but certainly matching, true, false, anywhere where students have to provide us with the answer, but we're giving them the choice of what they have to make or select. And with any type of assessment item, there's pros and cons. The pros of selected response items, and this is sort of a summary from not only Larry's work, but also when we work together, we'll go through this little activity, but they're easy to score. Students have the answer in front of them, and it's a quick way for sure to measure surface content knowledge. We'll talk about how we can design even selected response items to have them help students show us some even deeper knowledge. And certainly they're easier for students who may struggle with writing. The downside is there is the possibility for students to guess their way into thinking that they know it or to thinking that they don't know it. And we're going to talk more about how we can use selected response in combination with either constructed response or multiple items together to really try and make that inference so we minimize making an incorrect inference. They're difficult to write. We're going to talk about the importance and power of writing some of our own items, specifically selected response. And at times they're a little bit harder to test the application of the skill, which is why we're always going to have a balance of selected and constructed. And for any one individual item, certainly they're a little bit more difficult to provide at times specific feedback. Constructed response, and as a footnote, this is one of the webinars that there will not be any activity or opportunity for you to reflect. So I'm just assuming that who's ever watching it in a group, we're pausing and discussing if need be, but I'm just going to go ahead and move on. For constructed response items are simply asking students to provide an answer from their own minds. So if I ask a student, what color is my pencil? Is it blue, red, or green? I'm giving them the choices to select. If I just simply say, what color is my pencil? And I don't give them an answer choice, they're constructing their own response. And they're short constructed, simple words, a couple phrases, short paragraphs. We're going to talk more about the big ideas, the conceptual understanding, and the essential overarching questions can certainly be a form of constructed response. And then there's the more extended constructed response, multiple sentences, multiple paragraphs, essays, problem solving, and that's where we'll talk about the importance of having a quality scoring guide and rubric. So again, there's sometimes short, quick ones that we don't need as much of a scoring guide or rubric. We'll talk about that in subsequent webinars. But then other times when there is a more extended response, that we're going to need some type of scoring guide or rubric to some degree. And we talk about pros and cons here. The pros of a constructed response and getting students a chance to write and get us into their computers, the computers between their ears, their heads, they allow students to demonstrate deeper levels of understanding. And at times, it might even be easier when they're doing so to diagnose or identify some of their misconceptions. It takes a little bit longer to score. They're subjective to some degree. When we have a constructed response, we have to have a scoring guide and a rubric, and it doesn't mean it's impossible to have a strong amount and a large amount of objectivity. It's possible that their directions or questions are unclear, and we'll talk more in the next webinar when we talk about item writing, about how we make sure we tie them back to the success criteria. So some of the cons that we're talking about here, we're going to address that we can minimize them and augment some of the pros with both selected, but specifically here with constructive response. Quickly, I'm going to highlight just some things for writing quality selected response items and save the constructed response piece more when we get into the webinar on scoring guides. But one of the important elements first is that any item needs to be linked back to the rigor levels in the unwrapping. This is going back to purpose, evidence, inference. What is my purpose? So for this particular item, the author was saying that it was linked to reading for informational text 7.2. And the part of that standard that this item is addressing is determining two or more central ideas in a text. So the author has identified or bold highlighted those words because it's kind of hard in a multiple choice item to provide an objective summary. So the first thing is looking for that alignment. What is my purpose? And if we look at these four choices, which of the pairs of the central ideas about the Irish immigration best emphasize the author's reasons for immigration? And we're going to talk more about choosing the best answer. But if we take a look at the four choices, I'm going to pause just for a moment. Which distractor, A, B, C, or D, might need to be changed because it doesn't align with the purpose of the unwrapping? I'll pause just for a moment. If you're in by yourself, you're with a group, take a second. Which distractor probably needs to change because it's not aligned with the unwrapping or the purpose of the item? Correct, because I just assumed everybody in Valley View was on it and knew what they were doing. But all joking aside, if we look at item C, there's only one choice there. And what a student could do here is, number one, simply realize that that's not a possible choice since you asked me about a pair, and eliminate that, and now I'm down to 3. And it's not about creating items so students can be a good guesser. The last thing we want to do, and we'll talk more about this in the next webinar around distractor analysis, is helping them eliminate 2 choices and then pick from the best. Might as well give them a coin when that happens. Now, that's different than a test-taking skill. I'm assessing the students for me, and I don't want this particular distractor to take away my inference because it's not aligned with my purpose, because it wouldn't give them two or more central ideas. Let's take a look at a math example from Jan Christensen, who is a co-author with Larry on several books, math expert, very well known across the country, really great guy, great presenter, and great author. But if we take a look at the sixth grade standard, find a percent quantity as a rate per 100, etc. If we look at our four choices, there's a very good chance that possibly students would realize 360% would not be one of our possible choices. Now, certainly it's possible that they could multiply 30 times 12 and come up with that possible answer, but it doesn't line up with the assessment item, which was find a percent quantity as a rate per 100. So again, we'll talk more about when we create distractors to help students identify their misconception, but the key point I'm trying to make is that they're aligned with the unwrapping and the rigor level that is within the standard. Finally, I'm just going to highlight and we're going to share with everyone some of these pieces, and there's a lot more than 6, but what Larry has done is synthesized James Popham and Haladina and Rick Stiggins and several other of the deep empirical research experts around assessment when we're designing, for example, multiple choice items, how to create items that will give students the best chance to create a quality inference for us. So I'm just going to highlight a few of these. This would be what's called an incomplete question stem. This would be something we would want to avoid, because what we have is a break in the middle of the sentence where the brain has to stop and figure out maybe what we're asking. It would be better to write the item as a full question. Instead of saying, John said that blank would not allow him to be happy, it's much better to say, what did John say would make him unhappy? Simple adjustment that we can make as we're writing and designing our items, but also when we're evaluating existing items and improving them for quality. We'd want all the distractors to be close to equal in length. Now, they don't have to be exact, but whether it's third graders, 10th graders, people taking the LSAT or the MCAT for medical school, will by default choose the longest answer if it's disproportionate to the others. Now, what we don't want to do is have that choice create a situation where we can't make an inference. Did they just choose the longer choice, or did they make a mistake that I want to identify in terms of what the correct answer was? And then we want to avoid, if at all possible, negative question stems. Which of the following, there's a little typo there, is not allowed under the Constitution? A better way to write that item would be which of the following is or are allowed under the Constitution, and select all that apply for several reasons. Number one, a not question stem really confuses the brain about what you're asking. We've all been there. Now, this isn't about whether or not they're going to see that on an external assessment. This is about us making a quality inference, and we don't want the question to get in the way. Secondly, if it was actually A, B, and C, and they select A and B, we got a better chance to know where their misconception is and what they're missing. And finally, this item is actually aligned to some of the multiple choice selected response items that students will see on PARCC. So it's much better to say select all that apply when that would come up as opposed to a negative stem. Then finally, and we'll talk for those of you that haven't been through the cohorts or those that have, the need to write some assessment items using some of these tools that I've mentioned that we're going to provide for everyone during the seminars and workshops, because then we can become a better consumer of existing assessment items, assessments and tests we've already created before. One of the things I mention a lot is teachers rarely like to be told what to do, and that makes sense. We're professionals. You have a lot of experience and everything else, expertise, but then we shouldn't allow Houghton Mifflin to assess your students and just take their textbook test at the end of a chapter verbatim. We might be able to take some of these tools and take an existing assessment and improve the quality of the items, let someone else get the legwork done ahead of us, but have better assessment tools to put in front of our students because we can be a better consumer of what's existing. As always, I'm so appreciative of the time and opportunity to work with everyone in Valley View. Thank you for watching this webinar and the other ones, especially if you have not come to the cohorts up until now. But even if you have, if you ever have a question, please shoot me an email at davenagelvlplus@gmail.com. You see my Twitter handle, corwin.com, and my website page. Thank you so very much. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing everybody real soon.